My name is Maneesha Deckha, and I focus on trying to convince those who care about issues of justice and struggle and suffering that it's just not a human rights frame that we should be looking at, but also one that takes in the more than human world. And the way I do that is by focusing on the mutual imbrication of anthropocentrism and speciesism with other types of social justice struggles that are more familiar to many, like racism and sexism, to see how these concepts and struggles are really tightly intertwined rather than separate. So I first became interested in having this focus as a student in undergraduate education. I was enrolled as a feminist women's studies type of exploratory major student. And this was the early 90s when there was a lot of deconstruction being taught to undergrads and a lot of contestation of what were perceived to be naturalized boundaries like man, woman, male, female, reason, emotion, mind, body, and all the critiques of those binaries in Western traditions. So then I thought, well, what about the animal-human boundary? Isn't that equally socially constructed? Let's think critically about this binary in relation to these others because they seem to share continuities in the thought systems, especially in Western traditions, that brought them to dominance. And I had open-minded professors to help me do this as independent research work because there wasn't a formal curriculum. And I just became really passionate about those ideas, and I knew I wanted to try to land a job in academia where I could teach about this and research about it. The questions that I have focused on are to try to see the co-constitution of something like species difference with gender difference and race and cultural difference. And so I think the critical questions going forward is how to illuminate those connections to others, how to do it in ways that are intelligible, but also convey the complexity of those connections without so being reductive when trying to explain them. But what I see as then the really critical questions for the animal advocacy movement is to consider how does anthropocentrism today get reproduced? How do these ideologies get reproduced? And what can we do at the level of very early childhood intervention? So even with babies, right? Because we know from other disciplines that mammals start learning from day one almost. So how do they pick up these cues that then cement into an anthropocentric worldview from the time they start to get socialized within their human communities? And because of my intersectional background in feminist theory and critical race theory and post-colonial theory, I'm very interested in thinking how codes of femininity, codes of masculinity, just general cultural specific codes are a key agent in creating a certain iteration of anthropocentrism. For myself, I always came to thinking about animals from an academic space. It really was this connection through critical thinking, critical theories in the university setting, where I saw them as beings that can suffer, beings that are meritorious of justice, just like we would say human beings are. And so to me, animals are simply vulnerable beings, entities that have needs, have joys, have possibilities for flourishing, possibilities for not, that we need to attend to, if we want to consider ourselves and if we embody ourselves a compassionate orientation. One of the main problems that I see is that we don't have enough empathy, or humans generally don't have enough empathy for other human beings and non-humans. And I think it's a critical deficit because empathy really seems to be, from all the studies about it, the way that we can connect to someone we perceive as not ourselves. So not just through, let's say, what there's like Laurie Gruen and others have called a thin version of empathy, but really projecting what another being, without us being able to know definitively what they may want, having a rich conceptual imaginative toolbox to understand what someone else might be going through, whether that someone else is a human or, as we say, an animal, or non-human animal. And I really believe that if human beings had more of an emotional response that they could hang on to without being ridiculed or without having being diminished or belittled or implicitly kind of intimated that it's illegitimate somehow, that more people would cultivate empathy for animals because they would get more social approval and they would get they would feel that they were likable. So that the what seemed, according to social psychology studies, is that human beings, right, we're social animals and we want to be in society with others and have some higher approval rating for ourselves. And so when we have emotions that go off the norm, then that's very problematic in terms of fitting into the group. So empathy is something I believe that is inherent in us if we are ourselves given empathy growing up. That's why I think early childhood education is really important, right from the moment a baby is born, probably even before, and that it's critical to develop a trans-species ethic for empathy so that whether it's the individual animal suffering that people respond to or whether it's hearing of something like species decline statistics, people will be motivated to produce behavioral change in their own selves and then to advocate for that change. Because I think without that emotional connection, everything becomes abstract, and the current abysmal rate of most human-animal relating will stay untouched.